The update on your government's housing plan announced on Monday has been a backdrop for this event and has been frequently referenced in our discussions. The plan provides clear direction on the objectives that you are setting for legislative changes, with frank admission that there is still work to be done in order to prepare for that legislation. I know our delegates today will have questions, and we appreciate that you're willing to take those and respond to them. We want to get to as many questions as we can, and so what we're going to do is we're going to use Slido to capture those questions. They'll come up here on the screen for us. You can upvote them. If you like a question, you can ask your own question. Certainly keep, do we have that, the Slido reference going up on the screen as to how everyone can get logged into the Slido? In addition to submitting a question, you'll be able, you'll be able to upvote them. I already said that. And while our AV team activates the system, Premier, I have a couple of questions just to get us started. One of the key elements of the new plan is a commitment to allowing up to 3 or 4 homes per single-family lot. This is a policy change that was part of your leadership campaign, and advocates see this policy as having great potential to boost density. So we know that currently one of the challenges with the housing system is the degree to which planning and inspection departments are overstretched. Are you expecting a surge of redevelopment in this area in response to this change? And if so, what are your thoughts on what is needed to ensure that there's capacity to manage that?
Thanks, Jen. I think that when we're talking about this policy in particular, it does have the potential to bring on some really significant and positive impacts in community in terms of building the kind of housing that we need for our province to be a place where young people can see a future and where seniors can age in place. And I'm counting on UBCM, local government leadership, to identify how we're going to make this policy work. We at the provincial level have no interest in introducing policies that aren't going to have an impact. And we also have a significant interest in minimizing adverse impacts on communities. So whether it's issues around the availability of inspectors or infrastructure, water supply, we want to hear from you about these issues. We want to make sure that the policy works. And we also want to say that what we're aiming at here is a province where, if you're a house-rich, income-poor senior and you want to split your place in half and either rent out the bottom or sell off half of that property to generate some income for yourself, that you're able to do that, and in doing so, creating a space for someone else to live. Or if you're building a home, that it is the same process to build more affordable, more attainable housing as it is to build the most expensive kind of housing, which is single-family housing. Unfortunately, it's the opposite. It's the easiest to build the most expensive kind of housing. In my own community, I see single-family homes with a basement suite being torn down and replaced by single-family homes with no basement suite. So we're actually net losing housing in the community I live in because of the challenges to do anything other than replace a single-family home with a single-family home. So I think we all understand the challenge that's in front of us and what the intention of the policy is. And from here on, it'll be our work together to make sure that that policy has impact, because that's what I think we all want is opportunities for people to live in community. Nurses in the hospitals, teachers in the schools, workers in the local stores, because they have a place to live in the community, they have a place in our communities.
Thank you. One of the other pieces of legislation anticipated for the fall will legalize secondary suites across the province. Currently, many local governments already have robust policies permitting secondary suites. What would the impact of the province's legislation be on existing policies? Would provincial legislation overrule or leave intact existing bylaws?
What we're seeking to do here is provide a baseline across the province and for local implementation. Local realities that you're able to continue to do your work around your planning processes and so on. So for secondary suites, it's very few municipalities that still have restrictions on secondary suites. Generally, it was accepted a while ago, by many municipalities and regional districts that secondary suites provide a valuable source of housing and gentle density and community for essential workers and people who help your community go. And so we're just providing that baseline. There will not be, to the best of my knowledge, although the law is not yet in place, so again, an opportunity to provide suggestions about why it wouldn't be appropriate. But to be honest, I feel really strongly about this one. I struggle to know why someone with a legal secondary suite in their home would not be permitted to rent it out. And so the baseline from the province will be that they are allowed to rent it out.
Thank you. Is your government open to negotiating a new fiscal relationship with local governments in order to fund the infrastructure and supportive housing that we need?
Yes, so I hope you've seen already from our government our willingness to support local governments with the growth that we're seeing in the province. We think the federal government has a really important role to play here, and I'm glad you're having these discussions as well with them over the course of the past 2 days. But what we would like to do is tie growth that you're seeing with funding from the province. That is we want people to see in your communities the benefits of growth, and that's not always the case. You know, people see fast-growing communities, they see schools that are challenged with portables, they see issues around healthcare and so on. What they don't often see is the other side of the equation, though, as well, where you have a community that's not growing or is in fact shrinking, and they can't get teachers and they can't get healthcare workers, and it does bring challenges on the other side as well. So we see the way forward for our province is certainly around growth. It's around welcoming people to British Columbia, but part of that is around making sure that municipalities are supported. So the Growing Communities Fund is an example of what we'd like to continue to do with you, and making sure that you have the essential infrastructure to deliver for your communities. We're going to keep doing our part on the schools and hospitals and so on, and we want to support you to do your part on the pipes in the ground and the other essential infrastructure that municipalities, regional districts, and others are responsible for.
Thanks. We heard from Mayor of Surrey yesterday that the hospital is delivering a full classroom of children every day. So growth is real. Let's go to the next question, a little bit of a change. What is your response to Vancouver's decision to remove the Hastings tent encampment this morning? Oh, thanks. That's a great... Did that sound sarcastic? It wasn't. Because, you know, when we're talking about this housing plan, it's not removed from what's happening down the street in Hastings. The downtown east side and encampments across the province, perhaps in many of the communities that you're living in, are ground zero of the housing crisis. We have a housing market where people are falling out the bottom. As people adjust their expectations downward about housing, what they can afford, paying more and more for less and less, we see everybody bumping down a level, and those that are the most vulnerable, living on social assistance, disability assistance, falling out the bottom of the market, and even a level above them, low-income seniors, falling out the bottom of the housing market, despite significant investments from our government in homelessness, in addressing homelessness, building housing, providing supports. We've seen homelessness either stable or slightly increasing in a number of communities across the province, and that's because we have a challenge upstream. We have a challenge of the availability of housing for people who earn reasonable incomes, who otherwise shouldn't have struggled for housing. So this housing plan is directly related to what we're seeing on Hastings and in your communities in the streets. In terms of the specifics of Hastings Street and the encampment there, this is not a situation that is a happy one for anyone. It's an incredibly difficult situation. We've had fires in the tents at Main and Hastings. We've had explosions. There was a survey of 50 women who live in the encampment on Hastings Street. 100% of those women had been sexually assaulted in the encampments. Police removing guns and firearms from the tents. Last weekend, there was a fire on Hastings Street, and firefighters struggled to get to the building to save lives, put out the fire, save the housing, because they couldn't get through the encampments on the street. So for our part in the province, we're making sure that there's emergency shelter available for the people who are in the encampment right now. Their safety is a priority.
and working with the city to make sure that people are advised of that they're available. Our outreach workers have been working with city workers for the past few months, getting people into housing. We've housed many people out of the encampments. And emergency shelters are not acceptable. We want to get people into permanent housing, so we have 110 units coming on every month over the next 3 months that staff have been working hard getting into place so that people can go, once we know what their needs are, once we get a sense of what their needs are in the emergency shelters, into permanent housing. We do not want to do this kind of work. We don't want to be responding to encampments, but we have to, and so do you as local governments. We have supports in the budget for additional money to respond to encampments. Encampments are not suitable housing. We want to support you in doing outreach to workers or to people living in encampments, to get them into housing, to get them into permanent housing, and address this issue in partnership. It is challenging. We're working with Vancouver, but it's essential work, and the long-term goal for all of us is decent housing that meets the needs of people that are living outside right now. And we will get there in Vancouver and in your communities as well, but only if we work together.
Thank you. Pets are vital members of families and many housing units and shelters do not allow pets, making housing even harder to obtain. What are your thoughts on that?
We have a really significant challenge around rental housing, as I know many of you know, with about 0% vacancy rates in most parts of the province. I mention this obvious fact for 2 reasons related to pets. One is, if you are a landlord and you have a place to rent, you have 40 people lined up to rent your place, and 10 of them have dogs, and 30 of them don't, it makes it easy to say, hey, no pets. And so increasing rental housing supply, increasing vacancy rates, by doing so, meeting that demand and exceeding it, will give people more options. You'll be like, oh yeah, you can bring your pet in. We're keen to have you as a tenant. We're looking for a tenant right now. That's one piece. The second is we had a rental housing task force that went around the province talking to both renters and tenants, renters and landlords. And one of the pieces of feedback they got from a number of people who were landlords was, if the province, especially private landlords that have a secondary suite in a home and so on, if the province required them to have somebody with a dog or with a cat, with a pet, that they would take their housing unit off the market. And we are not in a position where we can afford to lose rental housing right now. I do know that there is and has been concern about the residential tenancy branch and the Application Residential Tenancy Act, and in particular delays around responding to issues, and that's already putting strain on the willingness of people to rent out units in their home. And so right now we're in a very precarious situation where we're trying to make sure that we're keeping as many units open as possible and responding to the realities of rental housing by bringing on as much rental housing as we can.
Thank you. Can we encourage health authorities and school districts to add on housing units to their existing and new buildings?
Absolutely, we can. I saw actually maybe it was Sanish, I don't know. There was a local government recently. I saw a schematic for a new civic building that has housing on top. And if you're here, shout it out. Ladysmith, thank you. Thank you. Special advisor saves the day. Ladysmith. And so local governments are taking that initiative. School districts can take that initiative. And I think that really reflects the all-hands-on-deck nature of the challenge that we face. If you had told a school board official 20 years ago that they would need to think about housing and where staff were going to live, they'd be like, why would I need to think about that? My responsibility is education. We really do need everybody to be thinking about how we can provide housing. And in particular, when we put the ask out to you and say, do you have lands available where we can work together to deliver housing, where you would like to see housing that's more affordable, more attainable for people in your community? That's why we're asking. Are there opportunities that you see? We want to work together in partnership with you.
Great. Currently, there are 2 teachers at Spring Creek Elementary living in vans, and it breaks my heart. Yeah. Property transfer tax as a stable funding for local governments. There's a few words missing there, but what do you think?
I recall that we're doing some work with UBCM around stable financial support for local governments. I also have been engaged in a number of conversations with mayors, particularly in the Northwest, about revenue sharing related to major resource projects, where they're seeing significant impacts from these projects in their communities, but they don't, as you would with a traditional manufacturing plant or a pulp mill or whatever, they don't have that property tax base that would typically come with these large-scale industrial projects. And so it's very front of mind for us at the provincial government. We're doing that work with UBCM, as I recall. And also we're working with the mayors on the Resource Benefits Alliance as well to develop sustainable funding for you going forward. But we are on the same page about the need for you to have the financial ability to respond to the growth you're seeing in your communities. A down payment, I would describe it as, the Growing Communities Fund. This is something that's been neglected for too long. And when I go to Prince Rupert, and they're telling me that their entire water system was at risk of collapse last Christmas. They had to declare a state of emergency. It's an unacceptable situation in our province. We are a province that has resources and capacity, and the basics, water, sewer, and so on, needs to be taken care of. That's why Iona water treatment was one of our priorities with the federal government when we went out there. It's why we were with Metro Vancouver advocating for that. It's why we're doing work with local governments across the province to support infrastructure, and we're going to continue to do that work together.
Great. Well, we are 3:20. I'm going to ask one last question. What does the housing flipping tax look like?
Asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend.
Thanks. So this is some of the policy work that we're going to do, but the core design of it is that the shorter period of time that you hold a property, the higher the rate of tax will be. There's some policy work to be done about whether it can be based on the proceeds of the sale and so on. The federal government has implemented an initiative that's aimed at a similar kind of activity, and they have a list of exemptions. So I think that the significant policy work is really around where we want to make sure that, you know, if you lose your job and you have to sell your place unexpectedly, if there's a death in the family, these kinds of things, and you need to sell your place unexpectedly, that's not the concern that we're aiming this at. So we want to make sure to get it right. But I do want to say, you know, for those people that you know that are thinking about buying a place so they can flip it down the road, or maybe they have an investment property that they bought for the purposes of flipping, this tax is coming, and it will be aimed at removing the profits from that. So the warning has gone out. We'll be doing the policy work on it, and like all of our policies, always interested to hear UBCM's perspective, as well as those in industry, to make sure that we're not inadvertently going after an activity that's beneficial that maybe municipalities engaging in or otherwise.
Thank you. I think we could sit here all day and ask questions, and I'm sure everyone would be happy to do so, but I know that you have other commitments to get to. And we do want to respect your schedule. So thank you so much for answering those questions. Thank you also for leading in this space. British Columbians are calling for change, and your commitment is critical to bringing that about. This room is full of change makers, and we are ready to work together. You said that local government input will be needed on various facets of the plan to move it forward, and we are here for it. I want you to know that UBCM will do our part to provide local government perspectives and help the province implement your goals. Finally, I want to thank everyone in this room for being here, for not standing by and letting this continue. I think that everybody here has I hope that you've all taken something away from something that you've heard, someone you've connected with in this room. And I am just so pleased to say that this session is a wrap, and it has been wonderful. The discussion is not over, but we have come to the end of our time today. Thank you.